So a lot of people get really excited when they go to shows. They talk about the amount of people that were there. We know at the National, it was probably the second most attended on record next to the Anaheim show from 91 or 92. And a lot of people kind of see it as a barometer for the hobby being strong. And I think a lot of people left Chicago this past summer in 2021 and they thought like, wow, there were a lot of people, there. General admission just was huge, like probably almost sold out, to be honest. I know the VIP tickets sold out leading up to the event for the first time in at least a while. And then after the show, of course, the volumes of people that were kind of in the hallways of a lot of these hotels that were close to the convention center, they're just filled with like these stand-up trade nights, which is really cool. And people like, wheeling and dealing. If you really think about it, and we've seen this as kind of dealers, people kind of they come into the show and they don't have the intention of using money to buy cards, or even if they do, it'll be like, cards plus cash to get into another card that potentially could be a bigger card, a more rare card. In some cases, it could be they could have cash, in their PayPal accounts. Usually, is how most people pay these days, especially for larger transactions. I see friends and family, which is almost as good as cash, even though it's not. Cash has its own benefits too, but even if that money is truly cash and you're getting 100% cash for a card that you're willing to sell, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's new money from the hobby. It could be proceeds from something they sold on eBay or from a different show or at that same show, and they've got cash now. They've got a cash balance for it. So then you start to think about like the economic reality of all of this trading and cash transactions and partial cash transactions, and whether it's the person behind the dealer table that's selling the card, or the customer that's selling the card to a dealer or another customer. If it's not new money, or if it's not coming from a new person to the hobby, and that would be new money too, but instead of from an existing person that's in the hobby, would be from a new person. It's not really a good or bad thing for the market. It's not really going to help boost or support the current prices of today. I think in order to grow the hobby, and I'm not sure if you agree with me here, but you truly need new money from existing people that they pulled from somewhere else, or new money from a new person coming to the hobby. And at the same time, you want money not to be taken out of the hobby from existing people. You don't want to lose people that then kind of divert their money elsewhere. So you look at all these shows, you look at the National, you look at others, you look at all these trade nights. Like I like the fact that there's trade nights. That's really cool. Some of the things that we didn't have in the 90s, I felt, even though there were a lot of shows and shops, the hobby wasn't nearly as social, and social media kind of changed that. And trading nights have added another layer to that, where you can just kind of it makes the hobby stickier, but it makes it more fun too. So I feel like you're less likely to leave the hobby, because not only are you addicted to the cards, but you're addicted to the friendships, the relationships, and you've got all these new friends, and you're just embedded. And so trading night is another kind of component to that can help you kind of get hooked and immersed into that experience. I'm not just saying it because I want people to get addicted, but I'm just saying because it's cool. It's another cool thing about the hobby. So there's been a number of things that have changed about the hobby since the mid 90s. Of course, grading's become a big thing. Of course, serialized cards and relics in cards, but like the whole social component, I think that's really cool. But that doesn't necessarily mean, from my standpoint, that just because there's like more transactions taking place, it could be a whole lot of just like existing money and existing cards are just kind of changing hands at the end of the day. So it's not necessarily a telltale sign that the market's rebounding and this is like a sign of things getting better, and your base cards potentially being worth more money, and the low and mid and high level markets potentially even going up even more. What are your thoughts there?
There's a lot to unpack there. I would say that I do get that feeling often of the revolving door with a lot of these cards, where they're just cycling into one person's hands. And at the end of the day, isn't that ultimately what they are? Like, people, things happen. You have bills to pay, saw off your collection. And, these cards that you never thought you would sell, you end up selling. Someone passes on, and all of a sudden these cards are now made available again. It just so happens that this is happening at more and more of a rapid rate. So I would say that one of the places that I see a lot of the new money being put into the hobby, it's going to places that are not necessarily going to put the money back into the hobby, so to speak. And what I mean by that is grading fees with PSA. PSA is not going out and buying these cards now. They're taking the money, they're paying their people. Maybe their people are collectors. I would think that if you work for PSA, there might be something in you that makes you want to collect. Maybe not even cards, but there's probably a decent amount of card collectors who are working with PSA or any grading company for that example. Um, it's just one of those things where you would assume that they have some kind of passion for it. But you look at someone like a Tops or Panini or one of the distributors, are they going out and then buying up cards again? And like, no, they're producing the cards and they're paying their employees. So it's up to their employees what they do with it. So that's where the money from the wax goes. So if you're looking at those types of places and you can say, well, I buy my wax from this guy and he uses the money to go get more wax. Well, at the end of the day, it's funneling back to uh, your parent companies, your Tops, your Paninis. And if they're a wax dealer full time, chances are they're taking that money then and paying their bills with it. They're paying their other expenditures, their groceries, their gas. That's not hobby money. That is money that is then leaving the hobby. So that whatever profits they made on those boxes, they are taking elsewhere. So in that aspect, I think that there's a lot of money that is siphoning out of the hobby that people are putting into it that really doesn't get put back out there. In terms of the cards themselves, it's a little bit tricky. I've heard a lot of people, and this always makes me crack up, where people seem like they are almost entitled to make a profit on a card, and I think it's just because it was so easy for so long.
Mhm.
When it really should not have been as easy as it was, and it's kind of corrected itself now. But I hear this so often as like, oh, I have more into it than that. I can't. Like, buddy, sometimes you got to take a loss. That's part of the game. That's really any part of business. You have to cut your losses at some point on certain cards. There's been plenty of times I've taken a loss, and it was a good thing I did because I could have lost a lot more. And a lot of times I want to be able to do that. But if you're thinking about where that loss occurred, it was someone else who took the card that they probably bought it from at that time, and if they got it graded and then they take a loss, then all of a sudden that you're out even more money than you were if you were to just grade a card and break even or make some profit on it based on what you bought it for raw and then sold it after grading it. So I think a lot of that money is being lost. But when you're just trading cards around, like I've got some really cool trades here. Here's one, couple examples. 2012 Trout, second year printing plate that I picked up at the National. This is available in my eBay store. It's up for $4,000 or best offer. And that's a price that I don't really expect anyone to pay. I don't really expect anyone to come close to that. So is the card really available? Not really. And I put in a few $100 cash as well as some cards that I had traded around too. But again, I put the money into that cash, but that card, it's not really available. So is that really helping with the siphon of money? Probably not. Here's another one I just got in this week. Juan Soto 2020 Chrome image variation.
Nice.
It's got some damage on the back. And for that reason, I'm not really looking to sell it. Not looking to grade it as well to get it to sell. Is that really, I mean, I traded a card that I already had in my collection to get it. Is that really helping the cycle? I don't think so. Here's another card I bought. Allen Iverson autograph from National Treasures. This one I do have up, and I think it's a lot more reasonable and more likely to sell than the Trout. I'm actively looking to sell that card. I put in a few $100 cash into it. When I sell it, I'm going to take whatever profits I get, assuming I make a profit, and put it back into more funds there. So that's an example where it is, where you are adding that money in. But say I were to trade this and try to trade it up for another card, I might have technically increased my value. If I will pretend this is a $300 card and I get a $500 card, yeah, technically I just upped what my value is, but I didn't actually get any cash for it. So maybe on paper I increase my value, but really no cash is moving around there. So I think that's where a lot of people are getting lost on this now, is that the market is rebounding and stuff, is that people may think that they're getting more money, but I've made plenty of trades where I thought I was going to get something out of this card and I ended up cashing out for significantly less
Mm-hmm.
than what I ended up getting into it for. So I think there's a lot of times it's people consider it found money or value that was added, but they don't realize that their time and the things that they had to do to put into the card to get it to this point, they're not free. And
Right.
you have to pay for that too. And it's not really adding anything. Nothing is coming in or out. And when you have that, it kind of makes for a stagnant market and not much genuine interest, which is a really big concern.
Yeah, a lot there. As opposed to buying Amazon stock, you still have the initial cost, and there's a cost of capital to that, and your money being tied up there, which you have with cards. But at least you don't have to actively manage that. It's kind of like a passive income maker, and then eventually you sell it for a loss or for a gain. But yeah, as a corollary to this, I think of people in the hobby, which there's nothing wrong with. And this is how I started too. I was a flipper, and I still kind of am, but the difference is now I've got a longer time horizon. Now I've got a rolling inventory that's substantial. So I am making a difference to the hobby where, like, money is being deployed in a somewhat non-temporary basis. And there's always going to be an outlay of X amount from my funds that I had that I eventually had to, raise from other things at one point. But if you look at where I started, or some influencers or people with YouTube channels that have, between, I'm not going to call out anybody, but between 5 to 15,000 subscribers, and a lot of what they do is kind of flip, and they've made a whole channel around that, and they'll buy stuff and they'll sell it for a profit, and they'll have like a really short-term time horizon, and they might only have like between 5 to 10 cards at any given time. How a lot of people start. And then you think, like, are these people they're just taking advantage of market inefficiencies? Are they really adding to the hobby if they're just like getting in and out of cards that fast? What they're doing is they're creating more efficient prices because they're taking advantage of the inefficiencies, and they're bringing prices back in line quicker, which is good for any market. But like at the end of the day, how important are they to the hobby? If a bunch of them were to like leave and never come back, would the hobby really get hurt that much? Probably not. But I think the reason why these people are important, and the reason why it was important for me to start that way, is because it ended up turning into more of just a flipping arbitraging thing. It turned into more of all right, I'm gonna pick up this card and I'm gonna try to hold it for 12 months to 2 years. And eventually, I'm gonna pick up this card, I'm gonna hold it for 5 years or 10 years, or what, I don't want to ever really sell this thing. And I'm gonna continue to keep on adding my money that I earn elsewhere into the hobby. And maybe there's some trades along the way. And of course, there's going to be some sales as I sell some of these things. They mature, and I'll deploy that money elsewhere. So there might not be like a whole big impact there, but in general, there is an impact. And more people that do that same thing, and they're justified in continuing doing so when there are bull market cycles that reward you. And they don't have to be like what we saw in 2020, 2021, where everything goes 10x and then comes shooting down afterwards. But it can be gradual, like what we saw between 2013 to 2018. Gradual increases in what most people had if they collected the good stuff, the right players that have withstood the test of time. So, but one of the other things you were mentioning was deploying money in the hobby that ends up going to something other than cards. And so if you think about like all these other companies, you brought up PSA, and there's a number of startups now. And I think that's one of the challenges. Like, it's cool to have so many startups because you've got interest from people that are kind of immersing themselves, that have got like a longer time horizon usually with businesses to be successful. So they're like, if you look at Jeff Wilson, he got into it and it kept on evolving and evolving. And he was never going to leave after the first 6 months with his YouTube channel. That wouldn't have made any sense. He had to launch the software. Now he's got all this other stuff, Discord, PSA network, and a few other things going on with like sponsoring deals and everything like that. People like that, if you have too many people in any one hobby where everybody's an entrepreneur, which I think you've noticed. Like now everybody wants to sit up at a show and set up and be a dealer. And you've needed a lot of people to fill those shoes because all of the shows, I feel like shows have probably 4 to 5x over the last 2 years. So you've kind of needed people to do that. But at the same time, in theory, you have a lot of people that think they're entrepreneurs. They've got business names, they've got LLCs, they've got Instagram accounts, branding, t-shirts like this. And I think the reason why it's sustainable right now is because a lot of those people are also willing to be customers. People like me, I'm still a customer. Even though I'm a businessman, I'm still a customer at the end of the day and a consumer to PSA, to some of the price tracking tools, to other people. I need to get my wax from somewhere. I need to buy singles from other people. So I buy stuff from Facebook. Ultimately, a lot of stuff that I buy actually ends up going back to other people for cards too. So, versus outside of the hobby or to a business where it's non-card related, which is really just like, well, that's out. Even though they could reinvest it and potentially use it to maybe improve their marketing efforts, which could eventually lead to more people coming into the hobby. So you don't want to completely take away from the ability of new investment to attract new people to the hobby just based on growing that hobby with investment. So you've got that too. But I don't know. It's kind of cool to talk about how all the different parts work. And I think where we started with this, where you can't really get a sense of the market just based on how many people attend a card show. I think generally, if there are 50,000 people attending a 3-day card show, I think at the end of the day, inevitably, you're going to get a decent chunk of money that's going to be new, just as part of a numbers game. So not all that money is going to be existing. You're going to get a decent amount of new inflows and new people with new inflows to help to support the prices of today. Because if you don't, at the end of the day, the prices are going to go down because we need new money to support all the new cards that are being printed and all the new cards that are coming back from PSA to kind of justify the valuations on those. So we're always going to need that. And we're going to need more and more of that as print runs continue to go up and the grading companies are faster at turning around these cards.
Yeah, you have to have that ultimate buyer at the end. And I think that the mainstreamness of the flipper culture has really kind of blinded us a bit. There are a lot of people who don't really, I won't say they don't care about monetary value because you have to some extent. I mean, every decision that we make in the hobby, whether you like it or not, has some kind of financial backing to it, or you have to, how do we determine if a price on a card is fair or we want to make this trade or anything along those lines. And being willing to be a customer, as well as I don't think that there are very many true sellers out there who only sell because that way you would have to offer some kind of product or service that you're either manufacturing yourself, and none of these people are manufacturing their cards unless you have a service like you mentioned Jeff's service, but even he's a buyer too. He's part of that consumer base too. He has to buy these cards to get into. Maybe not as much as someone else may be, but I think there not as much attention is given to the people who do go into the card shows, who are taking their paycheck from work that week, going to buy some cards for their collection. And it may not be these really extravagant, eye-popping $25,000 deals that you hear about at these shows. It may be something small at these $10 to $20 cards, but they add up. And with how many shows are going on and how many tables there are at these shows, you multiply all those transactions out, there's still a decent amount of new money coming in there, which I think is a really good part of it too, is that there are a lot of people who have that genuine interest too. And that kind of contradicts a little bit of what I said earlier with, the lack of genuine interest. But the stuff that they are genuinely interested in, you kind of have to, I think, examine what types of cards those are and why they might buy certain players. Are they buying these hot new baseball names or the next big rookie quarterback because they genuinely like the player and want to collect them? Or is it because it's more financially driven, or they think that they are good investments? And you don't know. I don't ask everybody, why are you buying this, every single time that they buy something from me. As far as I'm concerned, they're happy with it and they got it for the price they wanted, and I got the money I wanted for it. So that's it. and case closed on that. But I think it's really impossible to gauge, to get a full. We've speculated. I think we've both kind of talked about both sides of it. Oh, well, here's where the new money is, or maybe not so much. But it's very much a case by case basis. A lot of this stuff, and just seeing card show attendance is definitely not enough to say it. I mean, of course, the more people that are there, the more opportunities there will be for new money to be spent. Not very many people go to the card shows thinking that they're not going to buy anything. I think most people go there to buy cards for the most part. So you have to think that there's a lot of new money coming in there, Stu. Just is it enough to kind of offset the money that is going out, so to speak, at the
Right.
same time? I think that's really the biggest question of it.
Right. Yeah, 100%. Because if you really break it down, the proliferation of platforms to buy and sell on, in addition to the 4 to 5x of card shows over the last 2 years, I mean, that just shows the dilution of traffic that exists. And the fact that some of these card shows like ours is still popping is really impressive. Going back to what you're talking about with like the overall number of opportunities is definitely something that we shouldn't ignore.